Доброе утро. Tere hommikust. For the beginning, I want to tell you what is a festival. A festival or a gala is an event ordinary staged by a community centering on celebrating some unique aspect of that community and its traditions, often marked as a local or national holiday, millet or Eid. Festivals often serve to meet specific purposes, especially in regard to commemoration and or thanksgiving. They are associated with celebration and may also provide entertainment, which was particularly important to local communities before the advent of mass-produced entertainment. These celebrations offered a sense of belonging for religious, social, or geographical groups. Festivals that focus on cultural or specifically ethnic topics also seek to inform members of their traditions and the involvement of community. Elder sharing stories and experience provides a means for unity among families. Welcome to the festival. This morning, we were talking with the colleagues here and discussing, is it the 5th or 6th conference in this specific way, how Narva Kolledžis is organizing the big international conferences, and we understood that this is actually already 6th one. So the first conference, this kind, was in 2003. So it's already 11 years. Narva Kolledž is organizing a conference focusing on the cultural, historical questions, and these conferences always end with a publication. With a Studia Humaniora et Pedagogica Collegii Norvensis. I have here some books with different colors. And also for this conference, we will publish one book like that, and we have to solve the very big problem, what color it will be. But this will be later for the conclusions. So, I'm so happy to greet you here, and looking on the schedule we have here. It's quite tight, but it means that there is possible to go from one presentation from one section to another, and to listen and to pick up these topics. What are your favorite ones? So this is a conference, this is a festival where we meet, where we share knowledges, information, and where we can randomly or easily walk from one room to another room. It is held in Narva Kolledž in 3 different spaces. And this time, festival or conference is focusing on the town, on the urban studies, and the name Narrated Towns gives us possibility to talk about towns in very, very different ways. So it's not only focused on history, it's not only focused on the language, it's generally cultural researches about the town. And I hope we have today a possibility to exchange different ideas, how to study, how to research a town, a city. Here on this picture, this is from the beginning of 19th century, and Marge Rennit is going to talk about this much more closer. This is a picture about Narva, and these 2 people are meeting there. Probably they are not talking about the town because they are more interested about other topics, but they stand in front of Narva and they talk. So we are in the town in Narva and we talk about the towns, and this is the main idea. So thank you everybody for coming. In the name of Narva Kolledž, I am very happy to greet you here, and I hope we will have a wonderful and very interesting day. We are organizing this conference with Narva Museum, and now I give word to Merike Ivask from Narva Museum.
hommikust! Nagu Kaarel ütles, on mul hea meel teid tervitada nii Narva muuseumi poolt siin konverentsil ja rääkida ka natuke Narva muuseumi konverentsi traditsioonidest. Kuuleme. Narva muuseumi konverentsid said alguse 2004. aastal, seega 10 aastat igal sügisel septembris korraldame me konverentsi. Seekord siis on esimene rahvusvaheline konverents ja koos Tartu Ülikooli Narva Kolledžiga. Aga Narva Kolledžist oleme me oma konverentsidel rääkinud vähemalt 3 korral, kui meil on koostöö olnud Tartu Ülikooli arheoloogia osakonnaga, kes toimetasid siin arheoloogilisi kaevamisi, ehk kuhu praegu on ehitatud kolledži hoone, toimusid enne ehitamist suuremahulised arheoloogilised uurimised ja oma konverentside sarjas oleme siis 3 korral kajastanud nende kaevamiste tulemusi. Ma arvan, et sellised sügisesed konverentsid on Narvale ja Narva ajaloouurimisele väga olulised, kuna need annavad siinsele elanikkonnale suurema pildi meie ajaloost. Ja seetõttu on ka meie konverentsi ajaloosa tõlgitud nii eesti, vene kui inglise keelde, et ka linnarahvas saaks oma ajalooga rohkem tuttavaks. Ja nagu traditsioon on, siis Narva muuseumi konverentsid on alati päikesepaistelise ilmaga, nii ka täna. Nii et vaatamata ilusale sügisilmale soovin ma teile head konverentsipäeva siin kaunis kolledži hoones.
And before we start, some organizatoric information. Right now we start with a plenary session, and after that there will be lunch break, and as you see, it's lasting a while, even for 2 hours. It means that after we have finished our food, then it's possible to have a house tour in the building of college. So everybody who are interested, please follow the information. And then after that we will have conference, as I told, in 3 different rooms. And once more I just want to note that it's absolutely okay when you go walk from one room to another room during the breaks of presentations. And after that we will have a dinner for the presentators in College House inside. So we will spend the whole day here, and tomorrow morning we start at 10 o'clock in front of college and we have a city tour. So this is pretty much it. And in this room, as Merike already said, conference presentations are dubbed. Presentators, please notice that do not speak too fast in this room. But generally, the languages are English and Russian, of these working languages of conference. And now let's begin. And I'm so glad to call here for the first presentation Karsten Brüggemann from Tallinn University, our dear former colleague who actually started all these conferences. So, Karsten, thank you, and now it's your turn.
Tere hommikust, dobre utro, good morning. Okay, thank you, Karel, for these nice words. In fact, you're right. I am the one to blame for this series of conferences. Together with Katri and the colleagues of the college, we organized the first conference 12 years ago, I think. And so you can just understand my situation when Karel asked me to be present here at the consecutive conference. I simply could not say no to this offer. Even more so because it's the first time for me to be here in this amazing new building of Tartu University Narva College. It's really a pleasure to be here, to stand here in this fabulous environment, and to speak about cities, urban history, and in particular about Narva. Of course, I asked myself why I am here, and is it just because I started these conferences? But of course, there are some other reasons as well. Although I do not regard myself as an urban historian, I have lived basically my whole life in urban environments. And maybe even more significant, I have dealt with topics in my academic career that might be qualified as urban history. Thus, I might be called an urban historian nevertheless, in that sense that the past I deal with, to a considerable extent, has to do with urban spaces. My personal experience in urban history is basically shaped by three main projects. First, and Karel already spoke about it, it was this first presentation, first printed presentations of the first conference in Narva. And for that occasion, I did prepare an archival study about the re-emergence of Narva after the Second World War as a socialist city. And later, this project expanded into reflections on Narva as a lieu de mémoire, as a site of remembrance in northeastern Europe. Second, and maybe most importantly, together with a German colleague of mine, Ralf Tuchtenhagen from Berlin Humboldt University, I have published a German language history of Tallinn, you can see it here, which is nowadays already translated into Estonian as well. And in that particular project, I was responsible for the time starting with Catherine II. Third, I have dealt with aspects of tourism in Estonia and Latvia, concerning on the one hand the development of famous Baltic seaside resorts like Riga, Riga Strand, Reval, or Hungerburg, Ust-Narva. And on the other hand, I have dealt with the particular role that Soviet history nowadays plays in terms of contemporary PR actions by tourism agencies in Tallinn and Narva. The possibilities for doing urban history are manifold, and precisely since this field has been broadened its scope since the 1970s. According to the corresponding article in an internet encyclopedia we all know, urban history apparently deals with cities, or with city dwellers, or with events that transpired in cities, with attitudes toward cities, which makes one wonder what is not urban history. And in fact, you have just to look at recent issues of the leading journal in this field, Urban History from Cambridge University Press, to get an impression of what it means today to deal with urban history. Classic articles on demography, city government, or particular social and ethnic groups in an urban environment are nowadays under the influences of various turns in humanities, complemented by topics like places of leisure and entertainment, street slangs, street gangs, and cultures of crime, or everything connected to memory, imagination, and space, the so-called urban mind spaces. Not to forget environmental issues, gender aspects, and literary representations. Thus, for instance, even house numbering has recently become the object of historical research, and a Finnish author has discussed the history of numbered street names, including the cases of the famous lines in St. Petersburg, Vasilievsky Ostrov, and in Tallinn's district, Kopli. These new developments in reading cities have reached already Estonia. I had recently the pleasure to supervise a master thesis on the question of how in the 1920s advertisements changed the urban landscapes of Tallinn. Another master thesis has been written on the social background of taxi drivers in Tallinn and how the car in general contributed to the modernization of the city. In my short presentation today, I, however, will concentrate on my own experiences in dealing the above-mentioned history of Tallinn. And I'm very pleased that later on we will have the opportunity to listen to Andreas Fülbert's presentation on how to write the history of Riga. His recently published book on the Latvian capital came out in the same series as our book on Tallinn. The series has been published in German for all Eastern European cities that became the title of European cultural capitals. So far, all three capitals of the Baltic states have received their own German language history. Vilnius in 2009, Tallinn 2011, and Riga in 2014. Since these books, on the publisher's request, had to be without references, the final results aim at the general reader, although they are decidedly more comprehensive than usual travel guides. In a good sense, we might call all these books biographies of cities. They relate the history of a particular place in many complex facets. Apart from the general political background, they discuss demography, natural environment, physical expansion, municipal government, handicraft and trade, society and social organization, architecture, cultural aspects, and of course, famous individuals. The city thus is supposed to become itself a distinct collective personality and a representation of the past of the country and its people. If we consider the past of the Baltic cities, however, we face a challenge that is typical, as it seems, for colonial relationships, a heritage that has left a considerable impact on the writing of urban history on these shores. For Estonians and Latvians, the urban space for centuries has meant something intrinsically foreign. The Hanseatic cities were German-dominated and thus hardly ever considered to be the home of the demographic majority. Therefore, in the Estonian and Latvian national master narratives, cities didn't play any decisive role, and if somebody dealt with their history, it was exclusively in search of the Estonians and Latvians in cities. In general, at least until the Cold War, urban studies were the prerogative of German, mostly Baltic German historians, who on their part, as a rule, did not take the lower layers of urban society into account. While the Estonians and Latvians concentrated on the history of the peasantry as the mythologized core of the corresponding nation. Nowadays, this changed considerably. If you just look at recent scholarship on the medieval past of Tallinn and, for instance, Pärnu, which is mostly done by Estonians, of course. However, when our history of Tallinn appeared in 2011, it was not only the first German language history of the city for almost 100 years, but it was also something unparalleled in Estonian, for there simply is no comprehensive Tallinn history written in Estonian in one monograph. Plans to publish a collective volume in the 1930s were left unfinished because of the Second World War. And the effort to fill this gap during the Soviet era by a large collective of authors under the direction of Raimo Pulat necessarily followed the guidelines of Soviet ideology in concentrating on the craftsman's and the workers' city. To a large extent, urban history, as it has been related hitherto, was a quite exclusive story, not only in social but also in ethnic respect. To combine these different layers of the city's past was one of the major challenges in writing this book. Already the two names of Tallinn, of the city, the German Reval, or the Russian Reval, and the Estonian Tallinn carried different narratives, which is, of course, a typical problem for Eastern European history. To make things easier, we decided early on that we will use both names interchangeably, depending only on the context. Thus, whereas the Baltic German Liederfeste, the Baltic German song festivals in mid-19th century, they took place, of course, in Reval. The Estonians organized their celebrations in Tallinn. However, because of convenience for the reader, we did not use the Russian Revel when we discussed the cultural projects of the Russian inhabitants in late 19th century. You always have to find a kind of compromise. All three German language histories of the Baltic capitals do not claim to deliver the results of new, fresh research. They do depend on the work of the generations before them. Aspects nobody has dealt with previously, as a rule, did not make it into these books. However, each of the authors has his favorite topics. All of the authors are male. And they try to construct an own kind of narrative upon these particular topics. In the case of Andreas, I sense, who wrote this history of Riga, it is precisely architecture and the symbolic meaning in a certain urban environment of this architecture he always returns to. For me, I think the most important topic in relating the story of Tallinn or Reval was music. Actually, I tried to use, for instance, the Estonian song festivals, which were held since 1869, as a kind of guideline highlighting the particular cultural outlook of the various political regimes through the centuries. And I used, for instance, jazz to illustrate the special meaning the word Tallinn had for Soviet jazz lovers, at least since the famous Tallinn 67 festival, where for the first time in Soviet history, a jazz band from the United States performed, the famous Charles Lloyd Trio. Of course, music was also the thread leading my narrative into the years of the singing revolution, which was in Estonia pretty much, but not exclusively, dear Topatenza, a Tallinn-based story. For all this, like in the case of a biography, of course, you need sources. Aspects of an individual's life not covered by sources are hard to tell. Of course, under certain circumstances, you can make use of oral history, despite all its methodological problems. I mean, you can ask the person this biography is devoted to, or at least those who didn't know him. A city, although pretty much still present in its physical form, does not directly speak out to you. One of the most serious gaps, for instance, in the history, in the contemporary history of Tallinn, is the year 1917, the year of the Russian Revolution. Although we are pretty well informed about the dealings of the workers and soldiers Soviet in the town, we know nothing official of the dealings of the City Duma. Its records simply did not survive these years of crisis and turmoil. And the only study available discussing city administration in historical perspective covers almost 100 years. So its author did not make the effort to read newspapers in order to reconstruct the work of the Duma in that very year. Pretty much related to this question is also the fact that we actually do not know very much about the years of the First World War in Tallinn. Of course, as well, you can study newspapers, but it's a time-consuming task to do that. And nobody has done it yet. Reading memoirs covering this period of war and revolution, one often gets the impression that people would remember rather the first years of the Estonian Republic. And people would remember the years of the Estonian War of Independence. But the years of the First World War and the Russian Revolution, obviously, are usually considered less memorable. Of course, there are many reasons for this, why people did not remember so much about the years of First World War and Russian Revolution. For instance, the politics of memory under the regime of Konstantin Päts in the 1930s, when people exclusively were encouraged to write memories of the War of Independence. But this is, of course, not my primary concern here. I just wanted to illustrate the fact that the biography of a city always depends on the work already done by his predecessors and the availability of sources. In this, needless to say, he shares the fate of the historical profession in general. Let me finally come to the topic of reception. How did Estonians react to a history of Tallinn written by two German scholars? Former Prime Minister Mart Laar, for instance, himself, it's well-remembered historian, was quite skeptical, although he emphatically claimed that it is fine with him that Germans write about Tallinn. Germans, according to him, did play an important role in the city's history, and why shouldn't they write a book? However, according to him, he called our book comparatively solid. But in the end, he explains that we should have been more carefully with our sources. He criticized us first and foremost for all the important episodes we did not tell. And this is, of course, naturally quite easy to do, and virtually every reviewer missed something. On the other hand, the book we have published with its almost 400 pages, it was considered for the publisher to be much too long. To our happiness, it was really late in time, and the publisher wanted to be exactly on the market with this biography of Tallinn when the year of the cultural capital of Tallinn started. So the publisher did not force us to reduce the amount of the text. Interestingly enough, Laar did not mention the Holocaust, but other Estonians did. 3 other reviewers, among them also my Tartu-based German colleague Olaf Mertelsmann, they wrote about the problem, how to write the Holocaust in Tallinn. According to their view, the book's 4-page passage on the Holocaust is proportionally much too long compared to the only 2 pages we devoted to the history of Soviet deportations. It is true, Estonian historians most certainly would never cover these events that way. But at least to my mind, however, our critics failed to see first that the targeted audience of this book is a German public, and German public usually is expected to have an outspoken interest in the story of the Holocaust. And second, more important for people who write urban history, the execution of Jews, they took place in the surroundings of Tallinn, whereas Soviet deportations, as we know, they led to Siberia. So the process of deportation that did occur in many Tallinn homes is described, at least to my opinion, quite aptly and in many details. In writing this way, I preferred the narrative of the locality instead of the narrative of the nation. That both mass actions, Holocaust and deportations, were assisted by Estonians is mentioned as well in the chapters. And also we mentioned that the first Soviet deportation in June 1941 affected the small Jewish minority proportionally 10 times more than the Estonians. So to me it's perfectly clear that reviewers need to find something to criticize. Of course, I know it from my own experience. However, as this example shows, even writing on such innocent and apparently apolitical topics like urban history can raise accusations of being politically incorrect. In other words, the history of urban communities, pretty much like every other branch of historical writing, always depends on the subjective perspective of the author and the reader. The final truth is not necessarily what history writing is about. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Karsten. And any questions, comments? Does somebody wants to add something? We have here a microphone, and no. Yes. We have to do it because.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I just wanted to ask on the last point that you made about writing. You said you wrote the book for a German audience, and in focusing more on the Holocaust, you had that in mind, that this is more important for that audience. But when you write a book about history, how do you decide that you have to focus more on the priorities or the themes that are interesting for the audience rather than focus what is interesting or most important for the people that you're writing about or the places that you're writing about? Shouldn't you be focusing more on the places or the people you're writing about in order to introduce to your audience what lies at the, close to the heart of the people that you're writing about?
Yeah, thank you for this interesting question. I would say, and this is of course only a provisional answer to this question, I would make a difference between books I write because of my own scientific interest and books I write because some publisher has asked me to do that. So this is a quite pragmatic answer, of course, but in writing in history of a city, and as I already told you, I'm not really a devoted historian of Tallinn. I had to make some concessions. First of all, it was not possible to engage in discussions with previous authors because this is not the way this genre works. And second, the second reason why I decided to concentrate more on the expectations or possible expectations of the readers, it gave me, on the other hand, the possibility to write on topics that were not really that prominent in scholarly literature so far, for instance, the story of music. But on the other hand, I expected that people would love to read it. I don't know. I mean, nobody of the critics so far told me anything about it. But I think you always have to find a kind of middle way through expectations, potential expectations of the audience, and your own ideas of how to relate a certain story. If you really can base your story on archival documents, this is something completely different. And if you are engaged with your sources, but you cannot do it in such a format.
Some questions more?
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I'm Elena Rotan-Valter, and I find that the choice of music events as an indicator for city's history, it's amazingly interesting. And I have a remark about the sources you mentioned, or a period you mentioned that is really probably still a little bit underestimated, that period of the First World War. It's interesting that I found some sources in Russian military history, and the other source, British military history, as for the end period of the First World War. And these sources could be interesting for some research or studies in Tallinn city history.
Where did you find it? In Moscow, in the archive? Or?
Well, our architects in Tallinn and city planners took as a source the materials about. I think they are in Tallinn city archive about Peter the First fortress.
Yeah.
And connected sources, connected also mainly with architecture and city planning. And well, British military sources as for British fleet was situated there. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So, if there is no any further questions, then thank you, Karsten, once more. And as a small souvenir, we are not dealing only how to narrate the people, how to talk about the town. You can always also fold a town. This is something that Narva College has done. That this is a town hall square from the paper, so that you can cut out and to fold together old town hall square.
I have as well a present for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And now, Narva College has also very good experiences and cooperation with the Russian university, and also one of our closest friend university is, of course, in St. Petersburg, Herzen State Pedagogical University, and now I am very glad to call here Denis Ignatiev.
Спасибо. Я хочу поблагодарить за радость и честь возможности выступить в Нарвском колледже перед такой замечательной аудиторией. И тема моего доклада звучит следующим образом. Перевод и переводимость языков культуры в образовательном универсуме города. Я бы хотел предложить такое небольшое философское размышление на тему идеального града и его воплощения в зримые какие-то физические образы. По моему мнению, всякий город является собой попытку воплотить идею идеального града в зримые образы. Все города разнятся между собой степенью доминирования естественного функционала или искусственной идеи, лежащей в его основании. Ну вот это то, о чем Достоевский говорил как об умышленном городе, приводя в качестве какого-то крайнего примера Санкт-Петербург. Город как текст никогда не оказывается равным самому себе. Подобно тому, как текст всегда стремится быть истолкованным и переведенным, чтобы явить многообразие собственных смыслов и образов в универсуме читательской рецепции, так и город стремится воплотить идею града в бесконечных вариациях поликультурной городской среды. В ряде случаев очевидно, что идея города диктует условия даже функционалу. Тогда метафизика города пробивается через физику пространства. Например, идея геометризма Санкт-Петербурга, различно проявляющаяся во всей эпохе существования города. Человеческая жизнь в пространстве города подразумевает одновременное существование как в физическом пространстве реального города, так и в металандшафте идеального града. Это определяет сильную ментальную напряженность урбанистического бытия, сопряженного с перманентным осуществлением герменевтических процедур по отношению к тексту города. Предельная сложность участия в системе городской коммуникации объясняется тем, что город протяжен не только, но возможно, что и не столько в пространстве, сколько во времени. И мера включенности в систему городской культуры определяется степенью овладения навыками урбанистической герменевтики как искусство чтения городского текста. Всякий город является поликультурным по своей природе. Сложное многообразие его культуры не всегда определяется его поликонфессиональностью, многонациональностью и лингвистической вариативностью. Поликультурность города конституируется самой урбанистической идеей, подразумевающей созидание многообразных границ внутри городского пространства, призванных через антиномию разделения и соединения формировать цветущую сложность городской культуры, столь нуждающейся в границе как механизме самоидентификации и линии культурного напряжения. Существование в пространстве городской культуры определяет необходимость владения искусством перевода. Город интегрирует и синтезирует разнообразные языки культуры. Со времен средневековых университетов стать студентом означало стать горожанином. Сегодня образование во многом определяется задачей научить человека ориентироваться в городском пространстве, как реальном, так и идеальном, как в основе урбанистической цивилизации в целом. Философская урбанистика рассматривает город как совокупность запечатленного в урбанистическом тексте многообразия смыслов и ценностей. Подобный подход определяет специфику аксиологической герменевтики, предполагающей изучение городской культуры в ее отношении к созидающему субъекту. Одна из основных задач состоит в преодолении узости дескриптивной методологии, доминирующей в современных исследованиях городской культуры. Методология философской урбанистики позволяет изучать город как образовательный универсум, преобразующий в процессе чтения городского текста разрозненную учебную информацию в личностно значимое знание. Соответственно, этому определяется и своеобразный антропоцентризм вот такой философской герменевтики, во многом подразумевающий какие-то педагогические аспекты, ориентирующие восприятие именно логики созидающего субъекта. Литературоцентризм традиционного образования оказывается сложным для восприятия в современном учебном процессе. Предельная визуальность культуры и требования интерактивных форм участия заставляет задуматься о возможности использования городского текста в качестве основы для герменевтической практики. Ракурс аксиологической герменевтики позволяет анализировать основные этические и эстетические ценности в их зримом воплощении в феноменах городской культуры. Изучение иерархии городской среды, системы его формообразования, способов его структурирования раскрывают онтологические основания аксиосферы урбанистической культуры, обнаруживая неслучайность осуществления событий в контексте культурной истории. Постижение структурных закономерностей организации городской среды в ее ценностной отнесенности позволяет осуществлять верификацию герменевтических процедур, ограничивая произвол интерпретаций самой логикой формирования урбанистического ландшафта. Непосредственная включенность исследования в систему городских коммуникаций обусловливает возможность понимания процессов развития города с позиции созидающего субъекта. Успешность подобного анализа городского текста во многом определяется качеством применения процедур исторической герменевтики, обнаруживающих не только утилитарную, но и ценностную обусловленность возникновения городских феноменов. Синтетическая природа городской среды, его сложно структурированная целостность предъявляют к исследователю необходимость осуществлять интерпретацию и перевод различных языков культуры для адекватного прочтения текста города. Именно урбанистическая среда, как наиболее семиотически наполненная и напряженная, обнаруживает стремление к взаимному дополнению различных языков городской культуры. Точность и вариативность утилитарной и аксиологической ориентации в системе города зависит от качества осуществляемого перевода. Иначе город обрекает на труд перевода. Как пространство постоянно актуализируемых смыслов и ценностей, город нуждается в актуальном языке коммуникации. Богатство городского металандшафта, таким образом, определяется способностью этого актуального языка к переводу потенциальных смыслов города, лежащих в его основании. От уровня освоения языка города зависит мера погруженности в его культуру, степень собственной включенности в его метафизическую протяженность. Особое значение перевода ощущается на границе физики и метафизики города. Соотношение реального и идеального города и градов формирует облик каждой уникальной городской среды, обнаруживая универсальность мировых городских сценариев и неповторимость их реализации. Воплощение идеи града в камне города осуществляется как запечатление вечного в конечности повседневного, ибо ни один город не может быть лишен памяти, воспоминания или припоминания о вечном граде. Возможно, что город является одним из наиболее очевидных примеров выражения вечных идей в языке человеческого творчества. Каждому городу свойственна идея продолженности человеческого существования, его большей временной и ценностной протяженности, нежели отрезок биографии. В этом отношении любой город выступает в качестве пространства памяти. Самим фактом сохранения своей структуры город возвращает человеку ощущение непрерывности и закономерности своего существования. Даже утилитарная составляющая городской культуры неизбежно оказывается связанной с категориями времени и вечности. Одна из особенностей предполагаемого ракурса философской урбанистики заключается в использовании герменевтической методологии, позволяющей не ограничиваться исследовательским пространством истории города, но постигать логику формирования утилитарной и символической составляющих каждой частной городской культуры на основании анализа урбанистического текста, обнаруживающего универсальные закономерности конституирования города. При этом мы оказываемся в ситуации, когда всякий город становится воспринимаемым через призму художественного или исторического текста. Попадая в город, мы оказываемся уже не в пространстве улиц, площадей, набережных, а на страницах бесконечных книг, сформировавших образ города, вытеснивший собственный визуальный ряд. То есть возникает некая оптика текста, через которую мы видим каждый город. То есть для классической культуры довольно характерная ситуация, когда вербальность доминирует над визуальностью. И таким образом мы сталкиваемся с ситуацией, когда мы попадаем в некий ускользающий город. Город, который всегда перемещается в пространстве текстов. Поэтому, собственно, физика города ускользает от запечатления. Иначе мы всегда оказываемся не в том городе. То есть наши ожидания, наши представления, наши образы, они оказываются мало адекватными тому реальному физическому городу, в котором мы оказываемся. Собственно, это та самая ситуация, которая описывалась многими культурологами, и которую можно обозначить как пребывание образов в плену слов. И в этом отношении город становится, собственно, городом, наверное, тогда, когда начинает восприниматься как нарратив, когда его физическое пространство становится подстрочником для исторического и художественного текста. Но это как раз та ситуация, которая была обозначена как сложность городского существования в двух пространствах, символическом и физическом. Вот это то, что заставляет постоянно обращаться к этим символам, к их расшифровке и определяет вот такую ментальную напряженность. По большому счету, наверное, классическое образование как раз ориентировано на то, чтобы позволить студенту воспринимать город в такой осаде бесконечных комментариев и интерпретаций. То есть, собственно, город становится городом тогда, когда начинает восприниматься как текст. Да? То есть это такая ситуация, когда городские камни становятся несколько тяжелее вот, от этих бесконечных интерпретаций и переводов. И в соответствии с этим часто сегодня мы несем такое иго или бремя туриста, да? Когда приезжаем в какой-то город с неким набором информации, текстов, может быть, путеводителей об этом городском пространстве, и по большому счету мы не позволяем себе просто видеть. То есть это как ситуация нормального просвещенного человека, довольно классической культуры в картинной галерее. Я не имею права видеть только то, что я вижу. Я должен встать на некую условно искусствоведческую или эстетическую позицию и знать автора картины, знать сюжет и выполнять некоторые, ну хотя бы элементарные вот, герменевтические процедуры по толкованию. То есть невозможно просто видеть картину, я должен видеть какие-то смыслы, стоящие за этим. Да? Или это тот вопрос, который характерен для классической школы, что хотел сказать автор. В этом смысле, каково же городское высказывание, что хотел сказать архитектор, что хотел сказать город. И в этом отношении мы оказываемся как будто бы лишенными возможности непосредственного визуального восприятия городского пространства. С другой стороны, возможен абсолютно другой подход. Иногда мы невольно оказываемся в ситуации, когда попадаем в совершенно новый город, о котором не знаем почти или совсем ничего, и тогда мы воспринимаем действительно его, собственно, визуальный образ, постигаем его физику, и зачастую через вот это физическое пространство прорываемся, собственно, к тем символическим смыслам, которыми этот город наполнен. И вот встает довольно характерный вопрос для постнеклассической культуры о праве и о доминировании интерпретации при восприятии любого текста, в том числе и городского. Спасибо.
23. Спасибо большое. Вопросы, комментарии? I have one question.
Okay.
Your presentation was, how to say, you spoke about theory, or this kind of more theoretical way, but if you say that town is living in the texts,
Yeah.
so then it means that that the only source that you can see are the books or what or written materials. Is it also what you mean about text, or is text also the city walls, house numbers, and everything else, or you talk about the books?
Okay, sure. We may accept the entire city or town as a text, but first of all, I mean that our perception is based on the text as first of all as literature and visual arts, perhaps. I mean the priority of the idea of some theory that prevent our visual perception. So for me, I think the basis example is the comparison of St. Petersburg and Venice. St. Petersburg is the northern Venice. It has nothing to do with reality at all. But when you come to Venice from St. Petersburg, your expectation is to see any similarity. You've got nothing, but you try to find it. If you can't find it, you have to invent it and to present it. And several days ago, I saw a book about a book of pictures, some photos about St. Petersburg and Venice. It was called like St. Petersburg, Venice. It was a great lie, absolute lie, but it was well done. So there were two pairs of photographs, St. Petersburg and Venice. And I've been to Venice, and it was quite an experience from St. Petersburg. When I saw those pictures, I couldn't argue that there are similarities, but when I tried to recollect the real image of Venice, of the places pictured there, I understood that it's lie, just lie. But perhaps I was happy enough not to read too much about Venice, so I could see the Venice itself. But I couldn't say I was free from the great amount of texts, ideas that made me to think in some canonic way about that city or town. So that's the idea.
Thank you.
Просто как комментарий добавить, когда вы говорили об этом, сейчас тем более заикнулись о Венеции, мне вспомнился Итало Кальвино с его книгой Invisible Cities, невидимые города, по-русски, наверное, будет, да? Именно как раз он, мне кажется, играл вот с этой идеей, мне очень нравится эта книга, играл идеей с тем, что каждый рассказ, он описывает другой город, другой характер, а в конце выясняется, что это все Венеция, что это на самом деле один город. То есть это как раз наоборот игра с тем, что в зависимости от того, кто в этом городе, и в зависимости от того, кого ты встретил в этом городе, картинка может быть совсем другая. И может быть как бы то сравнение, которое вы говорите, вот там какая-то фотографическая или какая-то книга была, сравнение этих двух городов, Петербурга и Венеции, ну, в каком-то смысле, может быть, это субъективная интерпретация этого конкретного человека. То есть не обязательно это ложь, это просто интерпретация, это просто какая-то игра, вполне может быть. Так же, как у Итало Кальвино была наоборот игра.
Да,
один город
спасибо.
представить другим.
Замечательно. Вот игра, я думаю, что очень важное понятие, да, в этом плане. Ложь, конечно, не как сознательная какая-то фальсификация, скорее как мистификация, как игра, что можно обыграть и это. То есть, когда действительно эти города воспринимаются, ну, реальное освещение, реальная локализация, то говорить о неком единстве достаточно сложно. Но как только действительно происходит вот эта текстуализация, какое-то воплощение, уже вот отражение в пространстве культуры, то начинается совершенно замечательная игра с сопоставлением, с похожестью, с непохожестью. Но в конечном счете, да, так или иначе мы сталкиваемся вот с этой идеей ускользающего города, ускользающего от восприятия.
Еще вопросов?
Спасибо, очень интересно. Меня зовут Елена Ротенвальд. У меня такой вопрос. Вы назвали, что структура – это важный параметр городского сообщества, да?
Да.
Если так можно сказать. Как вы оцените Петербург? Что сохранилась ли заложенная в него структура? То есть это город с сохранившейся структурой или, по вашему мнению, она изменилась, опираясь на те источники, которые вы используете?
Спасибо. Замечательный вопрос. Это как раз тема, которая довольно часто обсуждается у нас на кафедре, особенно в связи с открытием магистерской программы, как раз посвященной философской урбанистике. Да, но она направлена именно на петербурговедение. И вот вечный вопрос, насколько Петербург Петровский город. По большому счету, ведь, собственно, Петровский замысел не оказывается воплощенным ни в плане архитектора Леблона, ни Трезини, эти собственные идеи, они не реализовались. С другой стороны, вот что в Петербурге удивительно. По большому счету, любой какой-то исторический сценарий, любая веха, она так или иначе, порой через катастрофы, через потрясения, позволяла рассмотреть какой-то исконный вот этот вот петровский замысел, который осознавался ли им самим, непонятно. Но вот это вот какое-то заряженное просвещенческое ядро с идеей рациональности, геометризма и прочего воплощается в очень разных зримых образах. Примером тому, об этом довольно тяжело говорить, но можно проследить на примере мемуарных текстов. Состояние города после революции, состояние города после блокады. Довольно страшные слова о том, что Петербургу идет вот эта вымороженность. Когда Петербург избавляется от рекламы начала 20 века, когда в Петербурге чахнет торговля, да, когда Петербург по большому счету обезлюдил, и вот это состояние крайнего декаданса как будто бы обнаруживает какие-то исконные замыслы, возвращая ему вот эту графичность. Да, это черно-белый город, который оказался во многом запечатленным в художественных фильмах там, до 60-х годов. И что удивительно, то есть это некий советский Ленинград, довольно сильно отодвинутый уже от идеи Петра и Российской империи, и чего угодно, но, собственно, Петербург, вот некий книжный Петербург, в этих образах узнается отчетливее, чем сегодня в многочисленных альбомах, тиражирующих фотографии Булы, например, начала века, да, где вот этот довольно буржуазный город, в общем, не вполне соответствует какой-то его метафизической идее, да, вот эта геометрическая метафизика, она прорывается именно вот в какие-то страшные для его истории моменты. Полагаю, да. Если речь идет, было вот выражение в советское время о Петербурге в блокаде Ленинграда, да. В этом отношении я живу в абсолютных новостройках, и применительно к этому пространству города нельзя сказать, что какая-то идея на уровне названия улиц, геометрии, чего-то, она вообще имеет какое-то место. В этом смысле все города одинаково, да, некое безликое пространство.
Last question.
Добрый день, меня зовут Губинская Ксения, я являюсь представителем Санкт-Петербургского государственного архитектурно-строительного университета. Вот вы заикнулись только что о том, что вы живете в тех самых новых районах. Как вы считаете, вот эта вот идея Петербурга, да, изначально коренной вот этот вот смысл, заложенный в историческом центре, имеет ли место быть вот в этих новых районах? Понятно, что сейчас вот эта вот буферная мегаполисная зона огромная. Имеет ли смысл с вашей точки зрения пытаться развить эту идею вот в эти буферные районы, в новое строительство?
Спасибо. Замечательный вопрос. Я даже не знаю, что вам как специалисту ответить. Да? То есть мне легче, вы привязаны к неким конкретным культурным феноменам, а я позволяю, чтобы не быть уличенным, да, в некой неправде, как будто бы над ними воспарять. Но вопрос прекрасный. Я задавал себе его, то есть, как бы зодчий, возможно, да, первый зодчий Петербурга или даже прагматик Петр, как бы он посмотрел на эти новые районы. А я думаю, ему многое бы понравилось. Возможность действительно реальной геометрии, регулярности, унификации, прагматики. Мне кажется, это то, на что вполне, в общем, он мог бы откликнуться. Знаете, вот говоря о новостройках, опять, с одной стороны, это идея вот города, лежащего в блокаде новостроек, да, довольно безликих. А с другой стороны, город, как повторяю, да, это прежде всего текст, это некое сознание города. Мне сдается, что сегодня городское сознание или некое вот самосознание города — это как раз новостройки. Это те коренные петербуржцы, которые переехали из центра города, из коммунальных квартир и оказались вот в этих вот маленьких хрущевках, в огромных новостройках, в совершенно современных домах. Да, и, собственно, наверное, какой-то период, мне трудно вот его определить, но, может быть, 70-е, там, с 70-х до 90-х годов, собственно, коренное население Петербурга, наверное, оказывается на окраине, поэтому вот где подлинный город, да, где сегодня какие-то офисы вот в этих вот домах, где рестораны, что-то еще, или где, собственно, живут люди, чье детство, как мое детство, проходило вот в центре Петербурга.
We have to speak to the microphone at first, and let's speak a bit slower.
Если немножко отойти от Петербурга, вообще, в принципе, да, противоборство исторической застройки и современной застройки, в вашем докладе вы говорили, соответственно, об исторической, ну, как бы, да, о историческом центре города, гипотетического города, не привязываясь к Петербургу, то есть ли смысл и, с вашей точки зрения, соединять вот вашу тему доклада, да, из исторического выходить на новое строительство и соединять, потому что в любом городе, в любом историческом городе это большая проблема разрыва исторического центра и окраин.
Кроме Венеции. Она просто закончилась. В этом ее огромное благо. Спасибо. Вы знаете, прежде всего, правда, я полагаю, это вот совсем лирическое, совсем дилетантское отступление, что город — это в первую очередь структура и система коммуникаций. В этом отношении не столь важна действительно сохранившаяся или не сохранившаяся архитектура, какие-то новые образы, сколь вот этот культурный подстрочник, сколь та структура, которая лежит в основании города. В Новгороде почти не сохранилось исторической застройки. Да, это очень малая часть, вокруг Софийской стороны почти нет. Это довольно безлико. И тем не менее, когда мы попадаем в Новгород, то исторически сохранившиеся названия улиц, они вполне возвращают нас в атмосферу вот этого средневекового города, где это прочитывается. В то же время далеко не всегда это ощущается в Петербурге. Да, вот эта оторванность временная от настоящей европейской традиции, она не всегда восполняется даже стилистикой дворцов, каких-то строений барокко и классицизм, которые, ну, не являются живой частью вот этой европейской традиции. В этом смысле отсутствие подстрочника, который, кстати, искусственно реконструируется, да, история Петербурга удлиняется там, ну, хотя бы до Нейншанса, хотя бы до какого-то шведского подстрочника, хотя бы до одной дороги. Город в этом нуждается. Как текст он не может не существовать. Спасибо.
Thank you for your presentation and for the discussion and also for you a souvenir. And it's very good that you started or you pointed out to the books and texts, because now we are going to listen a presentation exactly about books about Narva and Ivangorod. Please, Marge Reinit.
Good morning to everybody. Now we come from St. Petersburg back to Narva and Ivangorod. And I shall speak about the descriptions of Narva, Ivangorod as border towns in the 18th century and 19th century first half travel literature. And I was also very happy to see the drawing from the travel book. The author of the drawing was Englishman John Carr, and he visited Narva, Ivangorod in 1804. And it is a quite rare thing to find any drawings about depicting Estonia in travel books, so it's one of them. My English is not perfect, so I hope you understand my speech. Travelogues constituted a popular type of literature among the modern age European readers. Travel books fulfilled entertaining, educating and practical function. They enabled to discover countries and cultures that were otherwise unattainable for the reader, as well as acquire knowledge unaffordable due to social status. Descriptions of other regions and their inhabitants both evoked questions and confirmed the values of traditional European life and culture. Until the 18th century, Russia was not a tourism destination, and travels to this country took place only for business or governmental purposes. During the reign of Catherine II, Russia became integrated into European cultural world. As a result of her activity, the number of travelers to Russia increased. The Baltic Sea provinces were rarely destinations of European travels. They rather served as transit areas between Russia and Europe. Therefore, descriptions of the Baltic Sea provinces, including Estonian territories, constitute byproducts of Russian travelogues. However, there is no reason to underestimate them. The manner of descriptions and the volume varied considerably in different publications. Nevertheless, their impact on emergence of image of the region as well as its fixation was great due to the widespread of travelogues in this time. From the Great Northern War to the 1860s, Narva was a transit town on the main postal road connecting St. Petersburg with Western Europe. Therefore, the number of descriptions of Narva found in the travelogues of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century is relatively high. The aim of my paper is to study the way Narva and Ivangorod, the two border cities, located on the frontier between the eastern and western worlds, are depicted in published travel accounts of the 18th century and first half of 19th century. The confrontation between the east and the west is symbolized by Narva and Ivangorod castles standing opposite each other on the two banks of the Narva River. The paper focuses on comparative study of the descriptions of Narva and Ivangorod and studies whether the authors of the travelogues perceived and described to the readers the unique location of Narva Ivangorod. In my short conference paper, I can introduce only some of the travel accounts depicting the twin towns. A more thorough study can be found in the Narva Museum publication that was presented in the museum yesterday evening. In my presentation, I shall introduce plenty of quotations from the travelogues, as they express precisely the original idea of the author. The quotations are in English or in German, and the German quotations can be read on slides, and I can comment them. I find it equally important to observe what things, details, matters, does the author of the travel account notice, or on the contrary, not notice? And how does he or she mediate the knowledge, impression, or emotion to the readers? There can rarely be found references to the border of the eastern and western cultural space in the 18th century Narva Ivangorod descriptions in the travel accounts. Most of them describe and compare the two towns and focus on the comparison of the castle standing on the both sides of the Narva River. As a rule, Ivangorod was described as suburb of Narva. So the first travel writer we shall speak about is the Frenchman travel writer Aubry de la Motrée. He visited Narva in 1726 on his way from St. Petersburg to Europe. He approached Narva from the side of St. Petersburg, and he wrote, quote, Ivangorod is a small borough inferior to a good village and was formerly known by the name of Narva of Ingria to distinguish it from Narva of Estonia, which is situated on the other side of the river of that name. End quote. He appreciated the Russian castle. Quote, Ivan Vasilievich, the tyrant, had a castle built on a high rock that stands in the river, and called it Ivangorod. The rock renders its situation very advantageous, built square, flanked four bastions, has a strong tower and chapel built in the nature of a dome. The walls thereof are very thick and well built. Old Russian Narva, he means here Ivangorod, runs near the rock from south to north. End quote. He described Narva castle and compared the two castles. Quote, opposite to the Ivangorod castle stands another larger, much larger, whose walls are not so strong, though flanked with 8 towers. End quote. Later, when describing Narva, La Motrée compared its building with those of Riga. And he says, quote, houses, he means Narva, are built like those of Riga, and the streets ill-paved. End quote. Probably La Motrée meant that the German-like architecture was characteristic to the both towns. The comparison of the two Baltic towns, Riga and Narva, recurs also in later travelogues of other authors. The second author is also Englishman, The English travel writer, politician, and historian Nathaniel Wraxall visited Narva in 1774. After introducing the sights of Narva, he shortly described Ivangorod. Quote, "On the other side of the river, opposite the town, is a large suburb with an ancient fortress called Ivangorod, built by Tsar named John Vasilievich. There were the frontier towns of the Swedish and Russian territory for a long series of years, the river forming the boundary." So he speaks about the boundary. Then the later well-known German theologian Johann Bellermann visited Narva in 1781 on his way to the Russian capital. It's always important to notice whether they are traveling from Russia or to Russia. So he brought out a surprising opposition between Narva and Ivangorod. He considered Narva quite a modern-looking town, and Ivangorod was, in his opinion, adding to Narva some ancient dignity. You can read it in German. The next man is the British historian, traveler and travel tutor William Coxer described Narva shortly in 1785 on his second journey to Russia. About Narva, he said, quote, "On quitting St. Petersburg, we pursued our journey through part of Ingria, Estonia, and Livonia, provinces conquered from Swedes by Peter the Great. The houses of Narva are built of brick, stuccoed white, and it has more the appearance of a German than a Russian town. In the suburbs called Ivangorod or Johnstown, the colossal remains of an ancient fortress built by Ivan Vasilievich the Great impend on a picturesque manner over the steep banks of Narva." These were the travel accounts from the 18th century. Now I shall speak about the 19th century, first half, travel accounts. In the 19th century travel accounts, the Narva-Ivangorod unique location of the border, on the border of the German and Slavic cultural space was much more emphasized. And we can now follow it by these quotations. The Dutch bibliophile, historian, and politician Johan Meerman visited Narva in 1800 on his way back from Russia to the Netherlands. In his travel account, the meeting of the German and Slavic cultures in Narva district was evidently discussed. After 2 years he spent in Russia, he noticed the differences between Russia and its German provinces. According to Meerman, Narva, and especially its older part, was built in an entirely different style than the other Russian towns. Narva was built in German style, and it was by nature a German town. Continuing his journey through the Baltic provinces, Meerman resumed the subject. After leaving Narva, he found himself outside of actual Russia. According to his account, the both banks of the Finnish Gulf, he means the northern Finnish Swedish and southern Estonian Livonian region, were non-Russian. The next one is this John Carr that was spoken just just in the beginning of my presentation. The British lawyer and travel writer John Carr visited Narva in 1804, as it was said, after visiting St. Petersburg. Arriving in Narva, he noticed that the Russian character began to weaken here, and he expressed his idea, quote, "Here the Rus character began to subside. Most of the Boers speak German." And the Curonian nobleman, poet, writer, and publisher Ulrich von Schlippenbach described Narva in 1814. His description of Narva is thorough and sensitive, full of respect to the old, in the northern history celebrated town. He compared Narva with a well-kept castle. Schlippenbach compared two castles on the banks of the Narva River. He tried to comprehend the confrontation between the two castles. He associated different traits of character and the cultural background of the two nations. He means Russians and Germans that had built their castles with the different architectural styles of the castles. The castle of Ivangorod was strong and powerful, built by men, but was still somehow roundish and humble, more in Oriental style, as he supposed. And to the opposite, the castle of Narva, with its angular, indented and irregular walls, expressed in his interpretation the romantic spirit of chivalry, characterized as independent, brave, and lofty, but also as rough and wild. Quite interesting. The German historian, quite well-known man in Baltics, geographer and travel writer Johann Georg Kohl was well familiar with the Baltic and Russian conditions, because in 1830 to 36 he was employed as a tutor in Kuronia, and after that 2 years from 1836 to 38 in St. Petersburg, again as a tutor, a noble family. After his stay in Kuronia, he published a 2-volume book. Its headline is The Russian Baltic Sea Provinces. In the first volume, he described his journey from Lübeck to St. Petersburg via Riga, Tartu, Narva in 1837. Kohl clearly perceived the border between the two different cultural rooms. He esteemed also Narva and its stages in history. The description of the town was detailed in his account. As a border town, Narva had suffered a lot in history. Kohl meant the opposition between the Livonian order and Russians, also between Swedes and Russians. He meant that Narva had suffered much more than the other Estonian towns in history. Therefore, the Narva River, separating mainly two nations, Russians and Germans, had been the stage of struggles and diplomatic talks for times. According to Kohl's description, Narva was a perfect German town, unexceptionally inhabited by Germans. Further, Kohl discussed the opposition of the two castles by the Narva River. He used the metaphor of duels in his description, reflecting the confrontation of the two castles. In the same way, the hostile German and Russian communities inhabited Narva and Ivangorod towns were standing inhabiting Narva and Ivangorod towns were standing in confrontation on the banks of the river. The river divided the communities. The Russians inhabited the right side and the Germans the left side of the river. Again, Kohl used a metaphor. The Russian tail was added to the German body, he says. According to him, it was in the same way in Riga and Tartu. And the last travel writer I present is a German natural scientist, Johann Heinrich Blasius. He visited Narva in 1841 when returning to his homeland from a scientific expedition to Russia that lasted for 2 years. And in his account, he admitted that the town of Narva aroused strong emotions in him. According to Blasius, Narva was the first German phenomenon after the 2 years spent in Russia. The only exception, as he says, was a German hand organ he had heard in the streets of St. Petersburg during 2 years, he says. So some short conclusions to my paper. A certain dynamics can be observed within the limits of the period under discussion. There can really be found references to the border of Eastern or Western cultural space in the 18th century descriptions in the travel accounts. But on the opposite, the travel accounts dated by the first half of the 19th century are remarkably more expressive, paying much greater attention to Narva-Ivangorod location on the border between the Slavic and German cultural room. The descriptions dating from the first half of the 19th century, above all by German authors, tended to idealize the medieval town. It was meant mostly Narva and its German manifestations. In comparison to the 18th century, the descriptions of Narva and Ivangorod were written with a romantic feeling typical to the early 19th century. The feeling was expressed through idealization of the past, idealization of Germanism. And the last conclusion, I consider travel literature valuable and interesting source for historical research, as well as for urban history research. So, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions?
Thank you for your presentation, and it's more like a comment, because I am myself very much interested in Estonian towns in literature, and it seems that every town in Estonian literature has a kind of certain things which are always referred to, like Tallinn is a great castle never to be conquered and the city of power, and Tartu is the university town, and the mental power goes with it, and then Pärnu, a merchant town. But with Narva always comes with a reference to some war. It's not, it seems to be a very fragile city, a city like not to be as a city, but a place of memory. And this thing has been becoming stronger and stronger in very modern Estonian literature. It can be explained that the historians have lately described Narva in in Estonian literature, like Tiit Aleksejev and Andrei Fustov. And I wanted to ask if in those travelogues and memoirs about Narva in the 19th century, there is some kind of topic about the war, or the question, shall the two castles be there in the way they have been?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Yes, I have been interested in the image of Estonian towns and just using the same source, the travel literature of the same period, 18th and 19th century, and it's quite interesting. Draw out some very certain aspects of strong aspects of the image, and about Narva I can say that there are two very strong aspects. One is the Northern War and the Battle of 1700, not the 1704, but the first Narva battle, and the celebrated Karl XII in this battle. The battle has been remembered about 1 century and half later. In the 19th century middle, it was a very important issue, speaking about Narva. And the second very important aspect in Narva image is the waterfall. It is very dominant in all the descriptions.
So, short comments more? Then I just have one. So you said that writers tend to compare Narva with Riga,
yeah,
and not with Venice, of course. But with Riga, is it a question because they came from Riga?
I'm not sure. I think it is something they mean when they are speaking some the German building style. Then they mean Riga in Baltic states. Okay. Maybe it is this, but they are not speaking so much. It is in Tallinn style, but yes, they draw parallels between Narva and Riga.
Thank you, and thank you once more for your presentation, and one souvenir to you also. And for the end, for our plenary session, I'm very happy to call here Jaanika Kingumets from Tampere University. Jaanika has been here several times, and Narva is her research field.
Tere päevast, добрый день. Hello to everybody. I identify myself as a social anthropologist, and therefore I think my look at Narva is quite different from what we heard before. And furthermore, I do ethnographic field research, which means I am really working with the narratives of the people who are alive, and I'm working with the interpretations of those people's narratives and experiences. As already the title suggests, the inhabitants of Narva greatly experienced their town in deeply pessimistic terms. Why so is a justified question and requires a profound answer, which should involve many levels of comprehension. It is a common public knowledge in Estonian society that Russians in Narva continue living in Soviet times, and the source of their today's troubles, be it unemployment or information blackout, with regards to what is going on in Estonia or the EU at large, is due to their unwillingness or incapability to move forward mentally. The particular angle of my research that I present today strives to look at this issue in a more nuanced way. And I will basically highlight two narratives and aiming to point to the complexity of the Narvans' troubled situation today. My point of interest are so-called migrant background Russian speakers in Narva who are not born in Narva, but somewhere in the former Soviet Union. With few exceptions, they are born outside from Estonia in the former Soviet Union, and through various trajectories they have moved to Narva after 1945 to 1992. And for that reason, my informants are mostly of elderly age, over 50 years basically. And they have very various kinds of ethnic, linguistic, and cultural backgrounds, but they all carry a common feature: they are Russian speakers, either as speaking Russian as a native language, or Russian has become the primary language over the years. As a material of inquiry, I am using ethnographic data which I collected in Narva in 2010 and 2011. My data, and it is still an unfinished PhD project, I must say, which means the results and the analysis are not in the final stages. The data is comprised of people's life story interview material and complementary interviews, which are rather free conversations, and which are usually done at people's homes. And the data also comprises participatory observations during and after and prior the interviews. So the interviews and observations, they try to grasp Narvan's mobile life trajectories and the formation of their relationship to Narva as a home, as one's home. And this from physical, emotional, symbolical, and experiential aspects. Theoretically, I am the most interested in understanding what processes are involved and how the meaning of home gets to attach to places, to one place, in this case Narva, in the context of translocal living experiences. So hereby I look at the belonging and one's relationship to home as a process under making, encompassing the past and present life experiences at different times and places. There is a translocal and transnational aspect that I bring in to my research, importantly. So the material I have at hand is rich in detail, and it usually covers narratives across time and space, encompassing the life in various geographical areas and sociocultural settings, from the initial to medium to the final stages of the former Soviet Union, through the highly tense years of Narva's transformation to a town of Estonian Republic, and also to the current Estonia. And of course, the material encompasses the widening of the borders to the west, bringing along also the real experiences and imaginations of the life in the west. Now, leaving aside the larger theoretical framework, I want to concentrate today only a couple of narratives that stood out in my research material, and they have also received a lot of public attention in Estonia. And these are the larger narratives of a paradise and a town with no future, attached to Narva at different times. But I'm asking, what are the individual stories behind these collectively used narratives? And from my interviews, I have picked a couple of pieces of data which I present here. And I quote here Zhanna, 60 years old, born in Ukrainian village near Saratov, Russia, and I read it. Try to read it in Russian. Здесь я попала в 74-й год. Когда моя мама приехала к нам в первый раз, она сказала: «Девчата, вы попали в рай. В магазине мясо было, и колбасы были, очереди не было, сгущенное молоко. У нас даже по праздникам его не было. В кулинарию пойдем, такая выпечка. И пирожки, и пироги, и торты любые. Потом стало все хуже, потом пошли вот эти талоны все. Но это уже потом. А вот когда мы приехали, было здесь все и доступно, и все свободно. Мы каждый год ездили в отпуск, потому что хватало нам на жизнь. Так сильно не мышек, как говорятся. Как мы привыкли в деревне жить, что там мы ничего не видели. Даже нашим родителям зарплату не платили. В конце года давали. А так у нас и денег-то не было. Жили наши родители только на том, что они вырастят в деревне. And another piece of data is from one of the interviews with Vladimir, 61 years old, born in Tomsk, Siberia. And he told me in the following words that я, когда сюда приехал первый раз, у меня вообще было такое впечатление, что я попал в рай, потому что вы не очень представляете себе то время и ту жизнь за Уралом. Это как просто не скажешь, потому что здесь жизнь резко отличалась. Она даже отличалась от жизни в Ленинграде и в Москве. Абсолютно другие отношения, абсолютно другая жизнь, абсолютно другие магазины, все другое. Чистая Европа, только по-советски, если так уж выразиться. Когда я сюда приехал, я вообще ошалел. Я никак не мог понять, почему же так. Страна вроде одна, почему-то у нас там ничего нет. Ни в магазинах, нигде, а здесь все есть. До приезда в Нарве я работал в Караганде, страшный город. Вы же знаете, что такое Котла-Ярве. Это по сравнению с городом Карагандой, это рай неземный. А там, например, снег выпадет, сегодня он выпал, а в вечеру он уже черный, покрытый углем. Шаг, наверное, шутк 40 кругом. Город громадный, миллионный. Шахты эти разбросаны по всему городу, и все это и степь. И город Караганда – это город ссыльных. Раньше, когда этот город начинался, тут привозили в степь, из поезда выбрасывали. И живете как хотите. Там ничего не было. Вольная степь была. Just a couple of examples. So we see that the paradise is used as a metaphor in those narratives. And I can conclude that paradise for those people is a place with no worries in terms of the food supply, services, security, and ecological hazards. But paradise, the metaphor paradise also carries a social strata marker. It is used especially, for example, among Ukrainian and Belarusian origin rural population who had experienced famine and serious food shortages, or among many Ukrainians or Russians who had experienced living in highly polluting mining regions. The formation of the metaphor paradise is also and always a product of comparison based on lived experiences. And finally, the use of metaphor is also temporarily limited, being applied to Narva in 1970s and 1980s. But it is retrospectively used as a characteristic to Narva throughout the Soviet period. So in the ethnographic material I collected, it is obvious that Narva does not represent a paradise any longer for its inhabitants. Now the bigger question is, why is it so, and what has the image been replaced by? Perhaps the town has not transformed directly into a hell, but the evidence is plentiful that people experience the change in the city's development into worse, which results in contested and ambitious feelings of being at home in Narva. It is difficult to find a metaphor that would characterize the town as well as the paradise one. But the closest to that image in my ethnographic data that I could come up to is the town with no future. This depicts a lot of things, encompasses many things based on different life experiences during and over the last 2 decades in independent Estonia and beyond, transnationally and translocally. But I think first we shall ask why does the paradise metaphor starts to disappear? And I find that there are the main factors for that could be time, the strength of social contacts that shape the lived experiences, tense socio-political relations locally, and a change in point of comparison. When the time is passing by, then the strength of social contacts is decreasing. And this is a very normal process in migration studies in general. Migrants experience it everywhere. So now, particularly in the context of Narva and Estonia, the state borders start to matter after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and traveling becomes much more complicated and not affordable even. New transnational experiences appear, and the reference point, therefore, shifts to the West. And I'm also thinking that the basic idea of the paradise itself has changed. For instance, the socio-political aspects gain priority. The equality and peace between ethnic groups living together in Narva or in Estonia. While previously the existential ones had the priority, such as food and environmental safety. The town with no future narrative is closely linked with 2 other narratives, the ones of nobody needs us and loss of hope and possibilities. And I try to explain this by using the data from conversations with Galina and Anatoly, both over 60 years old and highly educated Russian speakers in Narva. The nobody needs us I will explain it by the example of Galina. Though she has stated that the last 2 and something decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union in Narva have been marked by injustice and decline in Narva. And that was a very strong statement. For her, this is directly linked to the politics of Estonian Republic, which started in her experience in December 1991, when the Estonian Prime Minister at that time, Mart Laar, visited Narva in relation to closing the Baltiets military factory. And stated, Mart Laar stated, and I quote here Natalia's words, "There is no cross-border town in Europe with a population over 30,000. And Narva at that time had over 80,000 inhabitants. Consequently, they were meant to leave." This was a collective interpretation of that single sentence. And the site I just quoted, probably taken slightly out of the context, started and continues to represent to many migrant background Narvans the official attitude towards migrant background Narvans and Russian speakers in Estonia at large. According to Galina, the professionals of Baltiets were young and highly educated people, the cream of Narva. They quickly concluded that here in Narva, they are not wanted and needed anymore, and moreover, that their life in Narva will be made terribly difficult after that. By having the human capital and capacities for mobility, they didn't waste their time and quickly left Estonia to somewhere else to sow more opportunities. But the collective narrative that nobody needs us vigorously continues to live on. What I mean by the loss of hope and possibilities. Casson Hage defines the home as a space of possibilities. It's not a very typical way of defining home, but I think that in that context it works very well. And he argues that home has to be a space open for opportunities, so that one can perceive opportunities of a better life, to develop certain capacities, personal growth, the availability of opportunities for advancement. And this was something that Soviet time migrants clearly experienced upon their arrival to Narva. Now, in the last decades, Narva has become a peripheral place both geographically and politically in Estonian state politics. And this is something that is very much highlighted in the material I have collected during my fieldwork. The restructuring of the whole economic sphere, industrial scene, has brought along the unemployment that has been lasting decades. And what has happened is that the dependency on elderly family members has been increasing tremendously. Whole families living on the pensions and depending on the housing of their grandmothers and grandfathers. And this means growing insecurity with regards to the future and survival in general. So no jobs, no decent salary, no perspectives for better future, together with the fear of being second or third category people in Estonia, push the younger generation to leave Narva and look for better life opportunities abroad. And in the narrations of Galina again, the loss of the younger generation in Narva is the main narrative, which tells everything about the future in Narva to her. And interestingly, my informants see the loss of their younger generations as something deeply locality related. And there is something in Narva in itself why people move away. There are no explanations such as that the youth in general would be very mobile in EU or at large, or anything typical for their Estonian or EU politics which lead the youngsters to be mobile and look for better opportunities. In those narrations, it is always Narva which gives the reason for those youngsters to leave. And finally, I would like to stress here that my informants see the Narva in terms of the face of an elderly woman, and which they experience physically. And that has become the symbol of Narva's decline, as I interpret it. I'm not going to make any further conclusions here. I would just leave the floor for your questions and comments. Thank you.
So, thank you. And questions and comments?
Thank you very much. Very interesting research you're doing. Quite a bit relates to what I'm doing, but from more art perspective. Couple of questions. The first is about your very last statement about the face of elderly woman. Is it possible to say a bit more where you get that idea? And the second question is about, do you look on these two narratives, how these narratives shapes and influenced by the kind of external opinion about the Narva? So let's say like about what is the Estonian community or Estonian, the rest of the country look on the Narva as a town, and if it somehow affects of the two narratives local people have here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm starting from the first question, the face of an elderly woman. Well, the left upper corner picture somehow visually represents what I have understood that people experience. So it is really a very physical experience that when you walk around the city and you see only old women. First of all, because of the men that died earlier, and it's also and it's something that is in a very sharp contrast with a life in 50s and 60s when the Narva's population there were much more women in the demographically in the town. It is just this kind of such a very, first of all, the kind of very contrasting picture what you see. Strikingly contrasting picture. And I think for my informants, it means that for them, the town would be kind of continue the life in a normal way and would have future if you see the generations, if you see the kind of balance of generations. And this is what they're lacking behind here. Well, and in that way, it shows the decline of the town. That it's not able to attract anymore the kind of normal demographical balance to happen in itself without any kind of. And I think somehow the people here they expect that there would be kind of means on the state politics level that would then turn this situation different somehow. I'm not sure if I actually answered your question, but this is what I had in mind when writing about it. And it's definitely the face of elderly women is also what comes through the kind of the media, the way how Narva is pictured very often in the Estonian media at large are such pictures of that type, which there is not much positive to find for those people. And the second question was about how those two narratives are shaped by the external opinions or external view. I see that it always goes hand in hand. The knowledge is always produced. Knowledge is a product of interaction. So, and people make their own interpretations, definitely. So what goes on outside of their living environment here in Narva is somehow always linked to what happens externally. but this is a very difficult process to research, I think, and by now I'm not sure what will be my means to make that kind of conclusions or interpretations. That is something to really think about, like how can we actually methodologically research something locally here when the image is very much produced somewhere outside. Question to ponder.
More questions?
Thanks for your talk. For the sake of curiosity, I have been talking with some locals here in Narva, asking them about their opinion of about what's going on in Ukraine, and of course also about the possibilities of that something similar may occur here. Surprisingly, I got answers such as we just want to stay how we are, we want to live a normal life, or what else? Yeah, talking about normality and talking about being tired of changes. Then I see the statistics, and the unemployment is quite high, the higher in Estonia. I walk around and people ask me for money. Of course, the city has been changed on the surface, like the gardens, the parks. But perhaps you can help me to understand this notion of normality, or tiredness about these changes, because I didn't quite get it. Thank you.
You were pointing to the use of the word normal or.
In spite of life not being perfect, or being worse than in other Estonian cities, what I noticed is that people are expecting for something worse, not for something better.
That as if they would experience something worse than the rest, or
as if what may come in the future may be even worse than what has been in the past or in the present, which is related. That's the relation with your presentation. Thank you.
Of course, first we should. I think first we should ask what is a normality, like how do people measure that in their own experience, and it's a question what we compare and all that. So it's quite a complex question. First of all, I don't think I have a clear answer for you in that respect.
If somebody wants to add something, then please
maybe
raise hand.
Somebody wants to comment on the same issue.
So I'm interested, do your informants have from their side some kind of positive vision for Narva also? How they see the future? Does it depends what they also do, or is it just that the Estonians and the Estonian government is guilty and there is nothing to do? How they think? Do they want back this old industrial paradise, or what?
I think that the opinions vary here, and all the narratives, anyways, must be contextualized in the past of those people and in what is going on today in their lives and in the context of the life experience in general. if we look for the dominant narrative, then yes, that is as if everything would be gone worse, unfortunately. But I think in my aim in my research is one of the goals what I have is also to bring out the parallel narratives as much as they are and to make sense of that. So I wouldn't stay here and and claim that everybody wants to go back to the old and so, but as I said, I'm not at the final stages of my analysis now, and here today I wanted somehow to talk about the more drastic examples, just to provoke ideas and just to ponder, you know, what is this paradise about and what are we aiming at. So I'm definitely there are parallel narratives, but yes, if you ask that what is the dominant one, then this is unfortunately that. But the answer definitely is not that the people want to, they necessarily want to live in the Soviet times, but it is somehow sort of the protest. You know, the way how the narrative lives is, this is a way how people protest against something that is going on and that doesn't allow them to live in, kind of experience the stability and the well-being in the within their families as if maybe they used to be. There is a clear protest for the change, but not necessarily saying that it cannot be better.
So last question.
Sorry, I actually have also a comment in relation to that question, yes, because my own research is about East Berlin, and through that question it seems like there can be many parallels drawn between Ida-Virumaa and East Germany in general, in the reunited Germany, and it's a very similar question actually related to if East Germans are happy in the reunited Germany, and the answer would be that also in East Germany the development has stagnated compared to the West Germany, and it's not necessarily that that people want to return to the socialist times, but they are much more critical of how democracy works compared to those living in the West. So maybe and there is also a lot of people, young people are leaving and so on, and there is a certain stagnation in development, and this is clearly a structural problem. So I can see parallels here with Narva, and so it's not necessarily that they want to return back to the past and the socialist past, but if they compare, then of course they are behind, and it's not only in individual hands to get going again.
Thank you very much for your very important comment, I think, and it seems to me that you actually you somehow concluded it very well. What was there around? What I perhaps myself would have liked to say about the array of the criticism is seems to be so strong, really, because of the point of comparison is this is not something so locality based and simple anymore, but the opening to the West and to all kind of different lifestyles, different kind of societies has brought in a lot of different points of comparison, and people somehow, I think, they develop the skills of criticizing in general, which may look the kind of the life experience even harder and fuller of pain than what an individual would say you in any other circumstance. So it's just kind of the widening of the space for criticism. Thank you.
And I have to say also thank you for your presentation and discussion. And one souvenir also for you.
Thank you.
And so we have reached to the end point of our plenary session only 10 minutes later, because actually this clock is 5 minutes ahead. So, and now I assume you also got these main themes, what we are going to discuss in the next sections in 2 hours. Right now it's a lunch break. Lunch is served in behalf of Narva College for participants of the conference who has a presentation. And at 1 o'clock around we will meet in foyer for the house tour if there is interest for that. So right now, thank you once more, and let's meet in 2 hours.